Hello, everybody. For today, we'll be continuing with our discussion on enzymes. And for this part, or for this video, we will be picking up on enzyme specificity. Okay, so without so much ado, let's dive right into the topic. So let's talk about enzyme specificity. What is this all about? So enzymes exhibit different levels of selectivity or specificity for substrates. Enzyme specificity is the extent to which an enzyme's activity is restricted to a specific substrate, a specific group of substrates, a specific type of chemical bond, or a specific type of chemical reaction. Now, the degree of enzyme activity depends on the active site. For some active sites, accommodate only one particular compound, whereas others can accommodate a family of closely related compounds. Now, simply put, what I'm just trying to say here is that enzyme specificity tells us about the extent to which certain types of enzymes can work or accommodate substrates. Okay, think of it this way. An enzyme is not or does not have the capacity to work on all types of substrates. Okay, dili niya na kaya buhaton. Na tanan klase sa substrates ang iyahang pwede nga i-work on or all types of reactions ang iyang pwede nga i-catalyze. There are limitations. Okay? Now, this enzyme specificity is setting the limitation for these different types of enzymes. It tells us na okay, for you, enzyme number one, these are the only types of substrates or reactions na pwede nimo i-work on. And you cannot touch these other types of reactions right here. Okay, so think of it that way so that you'll be able to understand what enzyme specificity is really all about. Now we have one, two, three, four, okay, four types of enzyme specificity, which includes the following: absolute specificity, group specificity, number three is linkage specificity, and number four, stereochemical specificity. So let's try and discuss each of these types of specificity for enzymes, starting with absolute specificity. From its very name, absolute, meaning these are enzymes that can catalyze only one type of reaction. Isa lang gyud ka klase nga reaction and isa lang ka klase nga substrate ang pwede niya nga i-process. Okay, thus making it absolute. Okay, now this is considered to be the most restrictive of all types of specificity. Of course, most restrictive because of the fact that it can only cater to one type of substrate or one type of reaction and is not common. Example of this is the enzyme catalase. Okay, now the action of catalase is that it catalyzes the conversion of hydrogen peroxide to oxygen and water. Hydrogen peroxide is the only substrate it will accept. What I'm trying to say here is that since catalase have absolute specificity, it can only work on one type of substrate and one type of reaction, and that is the conversion of hydrogen peroxide to oxygen and water. Other than that, dili na na pwede nga ma-process ni catalase. It can only work on the conversion of H2O2 to O2 and H2O. Now, the second type of specificity is the group specificity. From its very name, it these are enzymes that can cater or that can process groups of substrates or groups of reactions. Okay? Now, group specificity, wherein the enzyme will act only on molecules that have a specific functional group regardless of the type of molecule, as long as it has the same functional group, then these enzymes can work on that. Now, these functional groups may include hydroxyl groups, or amino groups, or phosphate groups. Example of this is carboxypeptidase, an enzyme having group specificity wherein it can cleave amino acids or amino groups rather from peptide chains, regardless of the type of peptide chains, as long as amino groups are present in the structure, then carboxypeptidase can work on them. Okay. Moving on, let's go to linkage specificity. These are enzymes which are specific to certain types of linkages or bonds. So ang iyahang lantawon here is the type of bond or linkage present in the structure of a molecule. Now, linkage specificity, the enzyme will act on a particular type of chemical bond, irrespective of the rest of the molecular structure. Okay, it does not consider the rest of the molecular structure, but rather it only looks at the type of bonding present in that particular molecule. Okay, pag kana siya nga molecule is pasok sa type of bonding na pwede i-work on of a specific na enzyme, then pwede siya nga ma-process kana siya nga reaction or kana siya nga substrate. Now, this type of specificity is the most general of the common specificities. Example of this is the enzyme phosphatase, phosphatases, wherein these can hydrolyze phosphate ester bonds in all types of phosphate esters. Okay? Now, phosphatase, again, are enzymes na specific to phosphate ester linkages or phosphate ester bonds. So, regardless of the molecular structure of that particular molecule, as long as there is a phosphate ester bond present, then phosphatase can work on that because again, it is specific to the type of linkage present in that molecule. And lastly, number four, the fourth type of specificity is stereochemical specificity. If you can remember our discussion on stereoisomers, it tells us about the fact that for molecules, for certain types of molecules, there exists a left-handed version and a right-handed version of that molecule, right? The D and L form of molecules. So enzymes having stereochemical specificity would enable them to act on a particular stereoisomer. For example, as L-amino acid oxidase will catalyze the oxidation of the L form of an amino acid, but not the D form of the same amino acid. Meaning, si L-amino acid oxidase is specific to the type of stereoisomer that it can work on. Dito lang siya pwede kang L form of the amino acid, not for the D form of that same na amino acid. Okay? Now, you might wonder, anong dili man siya pwede, na same lang man sila nga type of amino acid. Again, kani siya nga enzyme, si L-amino acid oxidase is specific to the type of stereoisomer that it can work on. Dili siya pwede mo work on the D form of the same amino acid. So those are the four types of specificity for enzymes. Now again, summary of these four, this just tells us about the extent to which a certain enzyme can work on varying substrates. Okay. Now moving on to our next topic. This is now on factors that can affect enzyme activity. Okay. Now let's define first the term enzyme activity. So enzyme activity is the measure of the rate at which an enzyme converts substrate to products in a biochemical reaction. Simply put, enzyme activity is just about how fast can an enzyme act on the substrate to produce the products in a reaction? Okay? Ang kapaspason daw ni siya. Kini sa enzyme activity is ang kapaspason sa rate sa conversion of the substrate to the products in a reaction using certain types of enzymes. In some reactions, pwedeng the conversion of the substrate to its desired product is very, very fast, wherein in other reactions, it could be a little bit slower. Okay? Now, there are factors na pwedeng apekto rather, sa kapaspason of the conversion of the substrate to its desired products. Okay? And we have the following for the factors. We have temperature, we have pH, we have substrate concentration, and we have enzyme concentration. Again, these four are the factors na pwede either makapaspas or makaslow down sa enzyme activity or the rate at which an enzyme can convert the substrate to the products. Now let's look at temperature and how it can affect enzyme activity first. As we all know, temperature is the measure of the kinetic energy of molecules. And the higher the temperature, the faster the molecules are moving and colliding with each other. Okay? See, as you have learned in your physics subjects before, you know that temperature is just the measure of the kinetic energy or the energy of in motion of molecules in a substance. And you also know that the higher the temperature, the faster the molecules are moving and colliding with each other. Now, applying this to the concept of enzyme activity, this concept applies also to collisions between substrate molecules and enzymes. Okay? As the temperature of the enzymatically catalyzed reaction increases, so does the velocity of the enzyme at work, furthermore speeding up the reaction. What I'm trying to see here is that, 'di ba, the higher the temperature, the the faster the molecules are moving in a substance. Now, applying that fact to enzyme activity, the higher the temperature, the faster the velocity of the enzymes at work are. Furthermore, speeding up the reaction. So, the higher the temperature, the faster the reaction nga mahimo in or using certain types of enzymes. However, too high temperatures is also not good for enzymes. Okay? Ang labian na po daw kataas na temperature is also not good for enzymes. If you can remember, enzymes are mostly proteins, right? And since they are proteins, they are also subject to the different processes that can alter the properties of proteins. For example, denaturation. Okay? So since enzymes are proteins, mostly proteins, they can also denature. And tag-as kaayo nga temperature can indeed denature enzymes. So taas ra kaayo nga temperature is not good for enzyme activity. Now, when the temperature increases beyond a certain point, the increased energy begins to cause disruption in the structure of the enzyme, which then causes denaturation. Now, you might ask me, Sir, at unsa man taman den nga temperature nga pwede nga or unsa ang limit sa temperature rather? At what limit of the temperature can enzymes still perform in a maximum na rate? Okay? We have a term for that one. That is what we refer to as the optimum temperature. Okay? Which is just the temperature at which an enzyme exhibits maximum activity. Now, as you can see here in the graph, okay, this graph here in the slide, Reaction rate increases as temperature also increases up to the optimum temperature. Beyond that, reaction rate then starts to decrease. So as you can see here again in the graph, reaction rate increases as temperature increases. However, it stops at the optimum temperature, which is again the temperature at which an enzyme can exhibit maximum activity. Pag mulapas na gani ang temperature sa level of the optimum temperature, then the reaction rate would start to decrease. That is because of the fact that too high temperatures again can disrupt the structure of enzymes. Specifically, it can denature enzymes. And when we say that enzymes are denatured, its structures, its folding na mechanism is disrupted. And when that happens, mawala ang function sa enzyme. Okay? Remember that one. When its structure is being disrupted, it will also be losing its enzyme activity. Okay. Now, for human enzymes, the optimum temperature is around 37 degrees Celsius, the normal body temperature. A person who has a fever or body core temperature exceeds at 40 degrees Celsius can be in a life-threatening situation because such temperature is sufficient to initiate enzyme denaturation. When an enzyme denaturates, it loses its function. The loss of enzyme function, especially those found at the nervous system, can result to a dysfunction sufficient to cause death, which is why for those mga people or persons nga maghilanat ang taas na kayang iyang temperatures, we take in medications, right? Aron nga mo lower down ang atong temperature because too high core temperatures can disrupt the proteins and enzymes in our body. And when the structures of these molecules are disrupted, they may lose their activity, they may lose their function, and it can cause severe effects to the person having these conditions. Okay? Again, temperature can alter enzymatic activity. The higher the temperature, the faster the reaction rate. However, there's a certain level or there's a certain point in the temperature na beyond that, mag-start na din og decrease ang reaction rate. And that point or optimum level of temperature wherein enzyme can exhibit maximum activity is what we refer to as optimum temperature. Now, the effect of temperature on mitigating the function of enzymes and proteins can be seen on how we sterilize equipments, materials that are subjected to perhaps bacterial growth, for example, in laboratories or in hospitals. Now, the destroying effect of temperature on bacterial enzymes is used to sterilize medical equipment and laundry, like in a hospital. Autoclaves are used to do such. These are high-pressure vessels with superheated steams on the inside that produce temperatures high enough to denature bacterial enzymes. Can you picture here on the slide is what we call an autoclave. I don't know if you're familiar with this. However, mura ni siya dako kaayo nga kaldero and air kwan siya nakasil ang iyaang taklob. And pag i-on na siya, mag-form na siya og steam on the inside, very very hot that can that can destroy or disrupt the enzymatic activity that are present in the bacteria nga naaana nga mga material or equipment nga gisulod aning autoclave. Okay? And then when the enzymes in, say for example, bacterial walls are disrupted, then bacteria will furthermore be killed or be destroyed na dayon by the high temperatures. So sterilizing using high temperatures used to denature bacterial enzymes. I remember in my college years in our biochemistry class, Every after laboratory classes, gina-disinfect man ang mga petri dishes, mga graduated cylinders, things like that. Every after lab activity, even the agar na ginagamit namo on bacterial culture, gina-disinfect na sila tanan using these autoclaves. Now, whenever we pass by laboratories, makabalog yun mi nga naagi pang autoclave na mga materials because of the very, very foul nga smell sa pathway sa laboratory nga awang masimutan. Grabe kabaho ang iya ang ma-produce nga smell when we subject our laboratory equipment to autoclaves for sterilization. So again, that is just one example of how temperatures can affect enzymatic activity and furthermore disrupt the activity of bacteria and even an entire human organism. Okay, now next factor that can affect enzyme activity is pH. So like high temperatures, changes in pH can also cause enzyme denaturation and subsequent loss of catalytic activity. So pareho daw ni temperatures, mga drastic na changes in pH level can also denature enzymes. Okay? Now most enzymes exhibit maximum activity over a very narrow pH range. Now we also have the term like optimum temperature. We also have optimum pH, which is just the pH at which an enzyme exhibits maximum activity. Okay. Now each enzyme has a characteristic optimum pH, which usually falls within the normal physiological pH range of 7 to 7.5. So when these enzymes are in an environment with or having the normal na physiological pH, then they can function at a maximum rate. Again, this being their optimum pH. However, there are notable exceptions to this one. Say, for example, the enzymes pepsin and trypsin. Okay, pepsin and trypsin, which are enzymes found in our digestive systems. These are digestive enzymes. Now, the thing about pepsin and trypsin is that they can function better at a relatively high pH value, which is why they are considered special cases or special exceptions. Pepsin, an enzyme found in the stomach, operates best at a pH of 2.0. On the other hand, trypsin, an enzyme found in the small intestine, works best at a pH of 8.0. Now, these are just some of the few exceptions. For the general types of enzymes, their optimum pH is usually um, between the range of 7.0 to 7.5. Okay, again, that is on pH and how it can affect enzyme activity. Now, shown here in the graph is the relation of enzyme activity with increasing pH levels. So the same with temperatures. As pH level increases, reaction rate would also increase up to the optimum pH. Beyond the optimum pH, reaction rate would then start to decrease. Okay, now let's go to the third. Okay, but before that, let's discuss about this first. Now, the effect of high pH values on enzyme activity can be easily found in the preparation of pickles and other pickled foods. Okay, kabaluman mo what pickles are, right? Now, ang preparation daw ani niyang food has something to do with pH value and how it can affect enzymatic activity. Now, the reason that pickles and other pickled foods do not spoil easily is due to the acidic conditions associated with their preparations, specifically with the use of vinegar, okay, which are acidic na liquid. The acidic conditions significantly reduce enzyme activity of any microorganism that may have been present in the ingredients nga gigamit in making pickles. Okay? Ang acidic daw gano ang nature of vinegar would reduce enzymatic activity of any microorganism that may have been present in the materials or in the ingredients na gigamit in making the pickles. Which is why pickles and other pickled foods dugay siya madaot because of this particular na process. Now, question. We know about the microorganism called Helicobacter pylori, right? H. pylori, you know what these are and how it can cause stomach ulcers. Now, how is it that such bacteria are able to survive inside our stomach when the environment there is very acidic? Okay? Nag-ingon ko sa inyo naman na high environments with high acidity levels can impede enzymatic activity of bacteria, for example. Now, how is it that H. pylori are able to survive in the acidic environments of our stomach? Now, I want you to research on that topic and I want you to submit an output on that one. I will just be making a post on our Google Classroom for this one. Now let's go to the third factor that affects enzymatic activity, which is substrate concentration. The concentration of the substrate. Unsa kadaghan ang substrate nga gina-try o gina-try o process sa enzyme in a certain reaction. Okay? Now active sites in enzymes can only accommodate one substrate at a time. Okay? The substrate must occupy an active site at a finite amount of time, and the products must leave the site before the active site can continue receiving other substrates. So what happens is that enzymes can only work on substrates one at a time, isa-isa. When a substrate binds on the active site of an enzyme, it would stay there for a finite amount of time, and after the product is created or the product is formed, the substrate would then leave the active site. And when that happens, the enzyme is again free of receiving na pod other substrates ngayon na pong i-work on further. Now, at a constant enzyme concentration, say for example that the amount of enzyme present is constant, the enzyme activity increases with increased substrate concentration. Okay? Magkataas daw ang enzymatic activity with increased substrate concentration. That is because mas daghan naman ang substrate nga ginatry niya og process. Okay? Now, enzyme activity will continue to increase up to a certain substrate concentration and thereafter remains constant. Now, the thing about the maximum substrate concentration is that pag ma-reach na siya nga maximum level, the reaction rate does not decrease but rather would stay constant or would remain constant. Now, what limits enzymatic activity to a certain maximum value? As substrate concentration, which is just the amount of substrate present, increases, the point is eventually reached where enzyme capabilities are used to their maximum extent. Now, the rate would remain constant up to this point, which is shown in the graph. When each enzyme molecule is working at full capacity, the incoming substrate molecules must wait their turn for an empty active site. Now, say for example, for easier na understanding, I want you to look at it this way. Think of what happens in the canteen during or before and during recess. So say for example, in a canteen, there are like 20 cantineras. Okay, and think of the cantineras as the amount of enzyme concentration that is being used in the reaction. Okay? Now, sa wala pa yung recess, di ba, gamay pa na nga estudyante ang moadto sa canteen or nga magpalit og pagkaon. So, dili pa kayo taas ang process nga gakahitabo in the canteen, which we could think of as the reaction rate. Now, here comes the recess time, and then in comes the flood of students nga nagdungan og agto sa canteen. Okay? So when that happens, bisan pag unsa kadaghan ang mga estudyante nga misulod sa canteen, because of the limited capabilities of the enzymes, the cantineras nga naa sa canteen, limited gyud ang mga ang tawag ani, ang interactions, okay, nga ilahang mabuhat. They are only limited to their number, to their capabilities, bisan pag unsa kadaghan sa estudyante nga naa sa sulod sa canteen. So the 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 reaction or the interaction between the cantineras and the students would remain constant up to such time nga nagkahurot na po dayon ang mga estudyante, naghinahinay nagbalik sa ilang mga classrooms, and then the interaction between them would then start to decrease. So think of it that way when trying to understand substrate concentration. The reaction rate is limited to the amount of enzyme concentration present in the reaction. So unsa pay kadaghan or unsa pay kadako sa amount of substrate present in the reaction, pag ma-reach na niya ang iyang maximum reaction rate, the rate of the reaction would just remain constant. Okay? At until such time nga magkahinay-hinay na po dayon og kahurot ang substrate na kailangan niya i-work on. That is again because of the fact that enzymes have the ability to cater to only one substrate at a time. Dili dungan, dili nga duha or more substrates ang iyang kaya nga i-entertain at the same time. So isa-isa siya. And then substrates would have to wait their turn before nga it can cling to the enzyme and before siya nga ma-convert na dayon to whatever product ang iyahang gi-desire nga ma-achieve. Okay. Now, what you have to remember, Pod, is that as I have um, discussed or talked about in my previous video, the amount of enzyme does not decrease in a reaction. Okay? Dili magkagamay ang amount of enzyme present. That is because enzymes are not consumed in a reaction. Okay? Dili siya mawala. Ginagamit lang siya in a reaction, but they are not consumed and they do not disappear. Therefore, enzyme concentration levels in a reaction would always remain constant. Now, the rate at which an enzyme accepts substrate molecules and releases products at substrate saturation is given by its turnover number. What is this turnover number? The turnover number of an enzyme is the number of substrate molecules transformed per minute by one molecule of enzyme under optimum conditions of temperature, pH, and saturation. Okay? Ang kwan daw, ang turnover number of an enzyme is ang number of substrate molecule na ma-transform ana nga enzyme per minute. One molecule of enzyme per minute, the amount of substrate transformed by one molecule of enzyme per minute. And different enzymes have different turnover numbers. For example, in this table here, it shows the turnover number for selected enzymes. So some enzymes have a much faster mode of operation than others. So we can see from this table, let's look at carbonic anhydrase, for example. Its turnover number is very, very big compared to that of, say, for example, lactate dehydrogenase. So we can see in this table that enzymes have, or some enzymes have a much faster mode of operations than others. They have greater turnover numbers than other types of enzymes. Now, let's go to the last factor that affects enzyme activity. And this one is on Okay, enzyme concentration, which is just the amount of enzyme present in a reaction. Now, because enzymes are not consumed in the reaction they catalyze, the cell usually keeps the number of enzymes low compared with the number of substrate molecules, which is an efficient thing to do for cells. Now, why do I say so? This is because of the low amount of enzymes present, the cell would avoid paying the energy costs of synthesizing and maintaining a large workforce of enzyme molecules. What I'm trying to say here is that for cells daw, mas efficient ang iyang habit nga gamay ra ang amount of enzyme concentration present in them. That is because pag dili kaayo daghan or dako ang enzyme concentration, then dili kailangan magamit og dako nga amount of energy ang cell to 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 synthesize and maintain a large number of enzyme molecules. Okay? And that is not bad food for a cell because enzymes are not lost in a reaction. They are not consumed. Thus, in general, the concentration of a substrate in a reaction is much higher than that of the enzyme. So in any reaction, the amount of substrate is always higher than that of the enzymes. Now, if the amount of substrate present is kept constant, and say for example, the enzyme concentration is increased, then it would mean that the reaction rate would also increase because more substrate molecules can be accommodated in a given amount of time. So what I'm trying to say here is that, say for example, na ato ang tas-an ang enzyme concentration, mas daghan ang enzyme present in a reaction, then that would mean that reaction rate would also increase. That is, because of the fact that mas daghan na ang enzyme molecules nga pwede nga mo accommodate sa number of substrates present in a reaction. Okay? The higher the enzyme concentration, the faster the reaction rate. For this one, okay, the higher the substrate concentration, the higher the reaction rate up to until such time na ma-reach na niya ang maximum substrate concentration. For pH, okay, for this one, um, reaction rate also increases as pH level increases until such time na ma-reach na niya ang optimum pH. The same is true here for temperature. As temperature increases, reaction rate would also increase until such time na iyahang ma-reach ang optimum temperature. Okay, so those are the things on enzyme specificity. So we're done with this one. And we're also done with the different factors that can affect enzyme activity. So our next discussion would be on this one. Okay, let's now look at the more medical aspects of enzyme activity. Specifically on the different prescription drugs that inhibit enzyme activity. Now, several common types of prescription drugs have modes of action that involve enzyme inhibition. For today, we will be learning about two of them, namely ACE inhibitor drugs and penicillin. Now, these drugs have the ability to inhibit enzyme activity. So let's look more into these drugs. Let's start first with ACE inhibitors. What are these drugs? ACE stands for angiotensin converting enzymes. Okay? Angiotensin is a hormone that increases blood pressure by narrowing blood vessels. Iyaha nga i-decrease ang space inside blood vessels, iyang i-narrow, and thus increases blood pressure level. That is the action of angiotensin. Okay? Now, until needed, angiotensin exists in the body in its inactive form known as angiotensinogen. Okay? So, kung dili daw na siya kailangan, angiotensin exists in our body in its inactive form known as angiotensinogen. Okay. Now, the thing about ACE or angiotensin converting enzymes is that they have the ability to activate the inactive angiotensinogen to its active form, angiotensin, by cleaving two amino acids from the zymogen structure. The zymogen is just the inactive angiotensinogen. Okay? So if you can see here in the illustration at the right side of the slide, we can see here nga the angiotensinogen is activated by removing two amino acids from the structure. Okay? This is what ACE drugs or hormones does, or ACE angiotensin converting enzymes does. Ilahang i-activate ang inactive nga angiotensin to its active form, the uh, angiotensinogen in active form to its active form angiotensin. Now, what ACE inhibitor drugs do is that iyahang i-counter ang effect of these enzymes. Buot pasabot, iyahang i-disrupt ang activity ani nga mga enzymes aron nga dili ma-activate ang angiotensinogen. Okay, again, pag ma-activate ang angiotensinogen to angiotensin, na siya'y ability to narrow blood vessels and increase blood pressure. And we do not want that, right? Especially for people having hypertension. Okay. So, we make use of ACE inhibitors. Now, ACE inhibitor medications block the action of angiotensin converting enzymes in converting angiotensinogen to angiotensin, leading to a lower blood pressure. Now, today, the prescription medication lisinopril is a compound heavily prescribed for treatment of elevated blood pressure conditions. Kaning medication nga lisinopril is an example of an ACE inhibitor drugs. Okay? Used by people, usually those having hypertension, to alleviate elevated blood pressure conditions. Okay? What is the action of ACE inhibitor medications? Unsa iyang buhaton gani? It counters the effect of angiotensin converting enzyme, leading to the inactivation, or it stops the activation of angiotensinogen to angiotensin. Next, okay, interestingly, lisinopril, as well as other ACE inhibitors, was first obtained from snake venom, the venom of a snake called Jararaca, a pit, a pit viper common to places in South America, such as Brazil. So, kanino nga mga drugs belonging to the AC inhibitor family is first obtained from the venom of these species of snake, the Jararaca. Now, next, let's go to the second common prescription drug, a very famous, actually, prescription drug that inhibits enzyme activity, penicillin. Now, penicillin, as we know, is one of the most widely used antibiotics. It was first discovered accidentally, in fact, discovered by Alexander Fleming in 1928 when he was working with cultures of an infectious Staphylococcus bacterium. Now, if you do not know about this very interesting part of scientific history, you can look it up on Google and you can read on how the great Alexander Fleming was able to accidentally discover one of the most widely used antibiotics to this day. Now, how does kailatan ni penicillin? Okay, we often encounter penicillin in our previous biology classes. Now, how does it work? Kabalo ba mo unsang iyang action or how it functions in our body? Penicillin, how does it work? Penicillin inhibits transpeptidase. Okay? So mainly, what penicillin do is that it inhibits the enzyme transpeptidase. Now, this enzyme, transpeptidase, catalyzes the formation of peptide cross-links between polysaccharide strands in bacterial cell walls. Okay? So again, transpeptidase is an enzyme that catalyzes the formation of cross links in polysaccharide strands present in bacterial cell walls. Now, these polysaccharide strands are providing protection for infectious bacteria. And with the help of the enzyme transpeptidase, mas strengthen pagid ang iya ang outside protection because of the formation of these crosslinks. Okay? Now, these crosslinks, like what I've said, strengthen bacterial cell walls, which is necessary to protect the bacterium from lysis, or another term for breaking open. Now, since penicillin can inhibit transpeptidase, it prevents the formation of a strong cell wall, and thus any osmotic or mechanical shock can cause lysis, killing the bacterium. So again, how does penicillin work? Penicillin inhibits transpeptidase, and kanisi transpeptidase is an enzyme used by bacteria to strengthen their cell walls. Okay? Ano na lang inyo ang remember or nga mas dali niyo masabtan. Transpeptidase is an enzyme used to strengthen bacterial cell walls. And what penicillin does is that it inhibits the enzyme transpeptidase. And thus, since i-inhibit naman niya ang activity ni transpeptidase, the bacteria now is not able to form a stronger cell wall, and thus it is easier for us to destroy them using um, medications that we use to counter the effects of these certain types of bacteria. So those are just two of common prescription medicines that we generally use to inhibit enzymatic activity. So always remember those things. If you want to know more on this one, you can look up for more types of or examples of prescription drugs used by people to generally inhibit enzymatic activity. Okay, so that concludes our discussion on enzymes, and now we will be having a discussion on vitamins. So our next topic will be on vitamins. So I believe that all of us here are very familiar with vitamins, right? Um, I even think that some of you right now are taking vitamins for your different needs. Now, for this discussion, we will now look first at the general characteristics of vitamins, what these are, um, what are they for, and yeah, let's look at the nature of these um, compounds. Now, vitamins are considered in conjunction with enzymes because many enzymes contains vitamins as part of their structural component. Now, if you can remember, during our discussion on the previous video on enzymes that I have shared to you, I have discussed a portion there regarding conjugated enzymes, right? And how these are formed or these are composed of two parts, which is a protein part and the non-protein part. And if you can recall, the non-protein part of conjugated enzymes are mostly vitamins, which is why vitamins are discussed in conjunction with enzymes because they are important part of their structural components. Now, what is a vitamin? A vitamin is an organic compound essential in small amounts for the proper functioning of the human body that must be obtained from dietary sources because the body cannot synthesize it. Now, key points that I would want you to remember from this slide here is that vitamins are organic in nature. They are essential in small amounts. Now, it is very important to take note of this for um, too much doses of vitamins may also be bad for a person taking them, which is why it is important to follow the prescribed amount of intake of these different types of vitamins, which often comes in small amounts. And another point that I would want you to remember is that The body or our bodies cannot synthesize them, and thus we can only obtain them from our food, from the food that we eat, from dietary sources. Now, they differ from the other major classes of nutrients from food, such as carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, in terms of their required amounts, which comes in micrograms or milligrams per day. So, unlike other of the nutrients daw kuno that we have discussed in the past, such as carbs, lipids, and proteins, which are often required in bulk, vitamins are required in very small amounts compared to them, which is usually only micrograms or milligrams per day. Now, continuing from this point here, how small then is the amount of vitamin needed by the human body? Or how small is the amount of vitamin that is sufficient to fill up the needs of the body without giving like a too much of a dosage. Now, for this to be understood, we should consider the RDA. Now, this term I know is also common to all of us, right? We often hear this in television advertisements, RDA, which means or which stands for recommended daily allowance. Now, the RDA is the average level of daily intake sufficient to meet nutrient requirements. Okay? Now, the RDA is just telling us about how much of these vitamins should we take on a daily basis sufficient for our needs without risking overdose. Now, for us to have a glimpse or a view of how small really is the amount of vitamin that we need for our human bodies, we can consider the RDA or the recommended daily allowance for vitamin B12. Okay, this is an example. Now, the recommended daily allowance of vitamin B12 is only 2.0 micrograms per day for an adult. Now, it is said that just 1.0 gram of this vitamin could theoretically supply the daily needs of over 500,000 people. Imagine that just 1 gram of vitamin B12 can supply theoretically the needs of over 500,000 people per day. So it's really that small. Now, I hope that from that you were able to catch or to picture out the how small it is really when it comes to the amount of vitamins that our bodies need on a day-to-day basis. Now, there are 13 known vitamins, okay? And scientists believe that the discovery of additional vitamins is unlikely. So scientists are saying na we have already discovered 13 and it is unlikely that we are to discover more. Okay? So they kind of like already established the fact that there are only 13 vitamins to exist in our physical world, and the discovery of new other vitamins is unlikely. Now, for them, the vitamin family is already complete. Okay, all 13 of them, nothing more. Now, despite searches for new vitamins, it has been more than 70 years since the last of the known vitamins was discovered. So, scientists are constantly searching for new vitamins, new undiscovered vitamins, but it has already been 70 years since the last known vitamins, which is the folate, was discovered, and until now, no new vitamins was discovered by any scientist in the world, which is why they already accepted the fact that more ni sila. Wala na something na discover pa because all these 13 is all of them are what comprises the entire vitamin family, nothing more. Now, strong evidence that the vitamin family is complete comes from the fact that we have lived all these years being fed with food containing all the known vitamins, and we have not developed any disease resulting from a nutritional deficiency of a certain undiscovered vitamin. Now, what this point here states is that all these years we have been eating food that supplies us with all of these different types of 13 known vitamins, different 13 vitamins that we have already discovered, and we have not developed a certain deficiency that would tell us na there is something na kulang pag yun. Okay? I hope you get the picture of what I'm saying. So, we have lived all these years and we have been sufficiently supplied of our bodily needs by these 13 known vitamins. And again, no deficiency of a certain undiscovered vitamin um, is is happening or is occurring in any individual all over the world. Which is why, okay, the needs are already supplied. Therefore, wala na kulang pa di ay nga kailangan pa nga i-supply to persons needing these different types of vitamins. Now, for years, scientists are constantly looking for what's kulang, okay? But they can't find any. So therefore, there aren't any lacking anymore or undiscovered vitamins already. They keep on looking for the kulang. If naapabagyoy, wala pa na-discover nga vitamins, but then after many, many years, wala naman sila nakita. Therefore, they have accepted, they have lived with the fact that the look or the search stops right here, and we should establish the fact that there are only 13 known vitamins to exist. Now, these 13 known vitamins are listed in this table right here, as well as the years of their discovery. So we can see from here that thiamine is the first vitamin to be discovered specifically on 1910. And folate, like what I've said earlier, is the latest to be discovered, which is on the year 1941. So it has been since 1941 that we have discovered a new vitamin. And up until now, year 2021, wala na tayo na-discover nga anything new. Now, classes of vitamins. Vitamins are grouped, okay, they are classified into two major classes, and this depends on their solubility to water. Okay? So from this classification, we have two types or classes of vitamins. We have water soluble, which comprises 9 out of the 13 vitamins, and fat or lipid soluble vitamins, which comprises 4 of the 13 known vitamins. Now, these water-soluble and fat-soluble vitamins are listed in this table right here, shown in the slide. So for the water-soluble vitamins, you have here the 9 out of the 13, namely vitamin C, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, pantothenic acid, vitamin B6, biotin, folate, and vitamin B12. Now the four fat-soluble vitamins of the 13 known vitamins include vitamin A, D, E, and K. Now, what are the major differences between the classes of vitamins, aside from the fact that 9 of them are soluble in water and 4 of them are not soluble in water but are soluble in lipid and fats? Now, for water-soluble vitamins, they must be constantly replenished in the body. Okay? Why? That is because they are rapidly eliminated in the urine. Okay? Again, water-soluble vitamins, they are rapidly eliminated in the urine, and thus, they must be constantly replenished in the body. Aside from that, water-soluble vitamins are carried in the bloodstream, needed in frequent but small doses, and are unlikely to be toxic. Key points that I would want you to remember for water-soluble vitamins: carried in the bloodstream, they are needed frequently, but in small doses. Now, for fat-soluble vitamins, these are found dissolved in lipid materials, generally carried in the body by a protein carrier, okay, or by protein carriers. Unlike in water-soluble vitamins na carried in the bloodstream, fat-soluble again are carried generally in the body by protein carriers. They are stored in fat tissues, and unlike water-soluble vitamins, they are more likely to be toxic if intake is beyond the prescribed healthy amounts. of these fat-soluble vitamins. So take note and remember that the difference, the main points of difference between the two classes of vitamins. Now this table here shows the other general properties between water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins. Now I want you to read on this one. I will share to you the PowerPoint presentation for this, and I want you to remember some of the most important key points from this table, okay, for you to be able to differentiate water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins when it comes to their absorption, their transport, their storage. Okay, where are they stored in the body? How are they excreted from the body? How toxic are them? How much of them do we need in our body? How frequent should we take them? And their relationship to coenzymes. How do they function in relation to enzymes, which are the molecules that we have discussed prior to this? Okay, so that's it. That concludes our discussion on the general characteristics of vitamins, as well as we have already also finished our discussion for enzymes. Now, I will be posting activities on this one, which you will be submitting in in ample amount of time. I will be giving you ample amount of time for you to be able to finish and submit the activities um, assigned for these topics, okay, for enzymes and then vitamins. So just keep posted in our Google Classroom. And in case you have any other questions, then please feel free to message me anytime so that I will be able to entertain your questions. Okay, so thank you very much for viewing. I hope that you did went through the entire video for you to not miss any important parts of my discussions. Okay. So that's it. Thank you very much for viewing this video, and I wish you all well. Goodbye.